Well, this isn't good. Donald Trump appears to be forgetting very recent, very controversial remarks that he made about a foreign leader. What am I talking about? Well, earlier today, during an Oval Office meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, a reporter confronted Trump about recent comments Trump made about Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, referring to him as a dictator, only for a visibly confused Trump to respond that he doesn't remember calling Zelensky a dictator, even though these were widely publicized controversial remarks that Trump just made a few days ago. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we are once again given reason to question Donald Trump's mental health and mental fitness for the presidency, because this is what he happened to say when confronted with a reporter during this recent meeting with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
Do you still think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
So Trump appears to have forgotten what he recently said about President Zelensky. Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question. Usually Trump likes to banter with the reporters, and he's no stranger to doubling down on incendiary shit he said in the past. So this response is really strange. Is this Trump's cowardice at play? Is Trump mentally confused? Did he forget about these comments? Because this is what he happened to say recently about President Zelensky.
Like a fiddle. He played him like a fiddle. That's an expression we use, yes, sir, to say that he's pretty easy. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast.
So again, calling Zelensky a dictator on stage, on camera, much was said about this comment. I mean, it was widely publicized. There were questions about this, confrontations, op-eds. This was all over the news just a few days ago. It's very strange. So again, not only do we have to question Trump's mental fitness, because as you recall, during the campaign, poll after poll after poll showed that it wasn't just President Biden people had questions about in terms of mental fitness, it was also Trump himself. And those questions were more prominent once Biden dropped out of the race and Vice President Kamala Harris took Biden's place as the Democratic nominee. Then the contrast was even more stark, and a majority of Americans in poll after poll after poll questioned Trump's mental fitness and mental health compared to Vice President Harris. So there's that component, but then there's also the component about dictator and dictatorship, and specifically not only recent things Trump has done to encourage the notion that he's a dictator, but the cult of personality that he's engendered from Republican lawmakers, not just Republican voters, that's bad enough, but Republican lawmakers, people who actually wield state power, who are doing all sorts of weird, crazy, silly, dictatorial things to foist praise and power on Trump. And we'll get to that in just a second. But as a reminder, speaking of dictator, Trump recently went viral for quoting and retweeting and retruthing a quote attributed to French dictator Napoleon Bonaparte. Trump appears to channel Napoleon in vision for executive authority. Quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." Trump on Sunday offered a cryptic one-sentence insight in what appears to be the guiding philosophy behind the first weeks of his presidency and his expansive and unprecedented efforts to reshape the use of executive authority. Quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law," Trump claimed in a media post now pinned atop his profile. We did a video about this, and he continued to double down on it. That's really bad and really disturbing to see a sitting president who's already the most powerful man on earth, at least on paper. I suppose the real most powerful man on earth is Shadow President Elon Musk. But that would be a weird, disturbing, and tyrannical thing for any president, including a Democrat, to ever say. Unfortunately for Republicans, and fortunately for Democrats, elected Democrats are morally superior to elected Republicans, and so an elected Democrat would never say something that unhinged. And it is unhinged, and it is dangerous, and people who say, it's just words, it's just memes, that's bullshit. That would never be the standard that they would impute or impose on Democratic politicians. They would say words matter from Democratic politicians and politicians as a whole and the President of the United States. That's true. Words do matter. But if they matter for Democratic politicians and Democratic presidents, then they also matter for Republican politicians and Republican presidents. And even more disturbing than that is what the Republican Party is doing right now with its government trifecta. They seem really interested in a Trump dictatorship. They seem to view him as a dictator. They seem to be thirsty for him to be one. And I want to remind you, before I get into this most recent example and some other examples that are also quite recent, the Republican Party has a trifecta. They control the White House. They control Congress, and that includes the House and the Senate, both chambers. We have a bicameral legislature, so they control the executive, they control the legislature, they control the judiciary. There's a right-wing supermajority appointed by Republicans, half of whom had been appointed by Trump himself on the Supreme Court. They control government in ways that a Democrat has not controlled government in decades, okay? And so what are they doing with that trifecta as wars rage, inflation skyrockets, and Doge is running roughshod over the American people and the American federal workforce? Well, you have Republican lawmakers who are, instead of focusing on the very real issues, they're proposing a bill that would create a $250 dollar bill that would have Donald Trump's face on it. Yeah. House Republican proposes $250 bill, and you'll never guess who he wants on it. We can easily guess. It'd be Trump. Republican Joe Wilson proposed a new denomination for cash-carrying Americans on social media this week, and he wants Donald Trump's face on it. The congressman said he had drafted legislation that would create a $250 bill that would serve Americans savaged by years of Bidenflation and honor Trump at the same time. Grateful to announce that I am drafting legislation to direct the Bureau of Engraving and Printing to design a $250 bill featuring Donald J. Trump. Bidenflation has destroyed the economy, forcing American families to carry more cash. Most valuable bill for most valuable president. Two things. Again, we'll go into some other examples. Number one, you have a trifecta. Actually, no. Number one, inflation is skyrocketing on Trump's watch, period. Inflation was going down on Biden's watch. You blame Biden for inflation. Inflation is going up on Trump's watch. Trump is president. By the Republican standard, Trump is objectively responsible for inflation and therefore should accrue a political consequence for it. But of course, Republicans and elected Republicans in particular are unprincipled hypocrites, right? Because they can't win the argument if they adhere to single standards, right? They can't win by even their own standards, so they have to create double standards for their people. Number one. Number two, you have a trifecta. You have total control of government. And this is what you're using with your time? Rather than proffer legislation to bring down the cost of eggs and gas and energy. I mean, Trump said he was going to snap his fingers and do it on day one. He failed spectacularly. What are you doing with your power? You're not in the minority anymore. You're not just trolling Democrats. You have the responsibility to govern. Republican lawmaker, Republican president, Republican Supreme Court justices. What are you going to do with that majority? Apparently not a damn thing. Except propose shit like this. Cultish, creepy, stupid shit. And by the way, Representative Wilson should be relentlessly mocked and belittled for the rest of his life. You should make fun of him. Every opportunity you get. This man should never receive a polite greeting for the rest of his life. He should be made fun of. You're a loser. You're a loser of the highest order. Your constituents, including conservative constituents, elected you to deliver materially beneficial results to them, and this is what you do with your power? And the sad thing is, he's not alone. It would be bad enough. And again, if a Democrat ever tried to do this with President Biden, President Obama, President Clinton, they would also be roasted to hell and back, and rightfully so. We shouldn't tolerate cults of personality in our politics. But that's all the modern Republican Party is. He's not alone. We'll get into this Rachel Maddow op-ed in just a second. As we discussed recently, Claudia Tenney, a Republican congresswoman, proposed making Trump's birthday a public holiday. Yeah. Other Republican lawmakers like Anna Paulina Luna, congresswoman out of Florida, Republican, she wanted to put Donald Trump's face on Mount Rushmore alongside President George Washington and President Abraham Lincoln. Another Republican lawmaker wanted to rename Washington Dulles Airport after Donald Trump. And the original legislation for this was by another Republican, Andy Ogle. So it was brought up when President Biden was in office, and it went nowhere. And now another Republican lawmaker is resurrecting it. Let's rename an airport after Donald Trump. And then you have another Republican lawmaker, the same lawmaker, Andy Ogles, who brought the first round of legislation to rename Dulles Airport after Trump, wanting to modify the 22nd Amendment in a way that it would permit Donald Trump to run for a third term. Yeah. So why am I bringing this up? Well, it's just, again, Trump refers to Volodymyr Zelensky as a dictator, apparently forgets about it, can't address the question even though it's just a comment, a high-profile, controversial comment, one of the most that he said recently. He's forgotten about it. And then it also invites an examination of his own behavior and the behavior of the weird loser cultists surrounding him, treating him like a dictator. bro, let's like rename everything after him. Let's put his face everywhere in our cash, on our mountains. Let's rename the airports after him. Let's let him run for, hell, third term. Why not fourth, fifth, sixth? Why not just abolish the presidency as we know it and make Trump dictator for life? Sadly, there is a number of Republican voters and Republican lawmakers that would support such a loser motion. Trump wants to be a dictator. Republican lawmakers are either willing to let him be a dictator or actively encourage it because they're so afraid of him. And it's just ridiculous, especially when they're the ones in power and therefore have the power to try to change things in meaningfully beneficial ways for you, conservative, liberal, whoever. And they're not doing it. This is what they're instead doing with their power. It's pretty pathetic. You should make fun of them for it. And you should politically punish them by voting all their asses out of office the moment you can and replacing them with Democrats. And of course, as you know, elected Democrats are morally superior, intellectually superior, and they have a better governing record. It's just simply true. You don't see shit like this when Democrats are in office, period. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.